Let's now turn it over. Would love to hear from our speakers, a little background on their journey. Let's start, Nicole. Could you give us a background? Great to have you here.
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me. Wonderful to see everyone. I'm Nicole Atchison. I'm the CEO of PURIS Holdings. So we are located here in Minneapolis, and at the end of the day, we're a family business, and it's kind of a lot of family affairs, which is how I ended up here today, I guess. Some of our mutual partners and some family relationships, but lots of just shared hopes and dreams in the Minneapolis area to lead food and ag tech. So lots of overlaps between those industries, and hoping to kind of lift all boats in this area and establish Minnesota as kind of a center of innovation. For PURIS Holdings, I'm second generation to the founder. So our company was founded by my parents, and my brother and I are kind of co-leading the various business units. We're a food and ag tech company spanning from the development of seeds that farmers plant, and with the sole purpose of feeding people. And through our various business units, we transform those into proteins, fibers, starches, and then into food. And we support innovation of plant-based foods, and we bring plant-based food to market. So really stretch across the whole value chain, supply chain, and work with brands big and small in the journey. So it's a very exciting space. I think Minnesota has got a big role to play in the plant-based movement. So excited to see everyone here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, wonderful. Thanks, Nicole. Great to have you here. Bruno.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, having the opportunity to talk with all you guys. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Super excited about it. So probably I'm kind of the outsider here. I'm not from the US. I'm actually from Brazil, and working at Nestle for the past 6 years now. And my background is on design, product and graphic and brand design, mostly on my background, my experience has been mostly on FMCG brands. Started with kind of also smaller back in Brazil on the beauty industry, so cosmetics, hair care, shampoos, and so on. And then also on the agency side, so a bit of the two ends of that spectrum. Which gives me a kind of an interesting perspective on this interesting relationship between marketing and design, and then after quite a while in that environment, I joined Nestle back in Brazil to lead the design team there. Such an amazing experience, working with from baby food to pet food. So as a designer, that was kind of a dream job, right? Acting in different industries, different segments, different consumers ultimately, but mostly working with brands that were very close to my heart. We have a very interesting mix of global brands and local brands, very powerful local brands in Brazil. And brands and design has been my passion since always, honestly. And then now here at the center in Switzerland, helping the food business, just more the culinary brands. In the US, you probably know some of our brands like DiGiorno or Stouffer's, Lean Cuisine. And then globally helping our global strategic brands to keep pushing the boundaries of innovation through design, I would say, and keeping our brands, or trying hard to keep our brands up to date with this very dynamic and constant evolution category, which is food, that we saw, for instance, last year, how has been tremendously impacted by the whole pandemic, how people started to cook more, and of course eating, not eating out of home, and that has impacted a lot on consumers' behaviors, and the dynamic of the market, difference between, and we were talking about that before we all started, the difference between the roles of legacy brands versus born pure brands. So yeah, this is who I am, what I'm trying to do at Nestle, and I'm super happy to be here with you guys.
Great, thank you, Bruno. Yes. Glad to have you both. A lot of good conversations. I know we're going to try to fit into the 50 minutes we have together. But why don't we go ahead and jump in? Kitty, if you want to start with a question you have for our speakers.
Sure. And so, and I just want to state that a lot goes into figuring out the pairings for Think and Link and bringing the right two speakers together. And one of the things that I love about this pairing is that, both of you being in food, as Nicole, you mentioned that you're a family business and we're paired here with a legacy brand. So I'm curious to see the similarities and differences that come from this conversation. My first question to you is in and around diversity specific to the ages that are represented across your teams. And I wanted to ask this question because I think we've seen and we understand that some of the most successful companies in the world bring together a really solid mix from the millennials to the boomers, et cetera, because we combine the fresh thinking, the millennials with the mindset of we can do anything, and the more experienced workforce that says, yes, we can do anything, but we need to be thinking about these things. And that's the magic of making things happen. Tell us a little bit about the makeup of your teams from that perspective, from both the large legacy brand and the younger up and coming brand, and how you leverage a diverse mindset for innovation.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. For my team specifically, we're fairly evenly balanced actually between kind of millennials, Gen X, and you have some kind of younger than millennials and it's a little bit older, but we're fairly well balanced between those kind of core three. And as we move into our production areas, the more rural locations, it starts to go a little bit more towards Gen X. And it's been interesting to see because as we're a plant-based food company, so we're on the kind of more progressive, a little bit more hip kind of side of the equation as it is. And so we do attract a younger workforce to a lot of our roles that are outside of production. But where it starts to get really interesting is when you're looking at frontline staff in rural communities or the technical team, engineers, et cetera, and we're putting up plant-based food, ingredient processing plants that require a lot of teammates in small rural towns, and actually bringing younger talent to those communities because they want to be a part of what they foresee as the future of food, how food will be made kind of going forward. That's exciting to see. It's exciting for those communities because the communities are, suffering from just exodus and not having that kind of turnover of people. So that's great for those communities, but it's also good for our team because it creates that, the mentor-mentee relationships. It really creates that like stickiness of how can we attract and retain those skill sets and knowledge. So big focus on having that diversity. And as a family company, obviously our parents are generations older. And so they have laid the foundation of the business. And a lot of the people from our team have been in the business for a long time. That is in juxtaposition to the new team, which is maybe younger, bringing new ideas, leveraging technology in a much different way, thinking about how they interact with brands and food in a much different way. And so it can create some tension, but that's typically good because that's where the good ideas come out of. The things that can make it past that tension are the ideas that usually can get the backing of all people. And those are the things that we can accelerate quickly. So it's definitely not easy, but it's one of those things that makes us better. And it's been a good thing to kind of work through and figure out.
Yeah, you're right. It's that tension that can bring the critical thinking and being able to listen to each other's ideas. And I just love the way that you and Tyler tell the story about how you have looked up to your father and how this has all come to be. So I'm sure that sets a really wonderful precedent inside the company as well.
Yeah, and I think, so Tyler is my brother and he's the CEO of PURIS Proteins, which is our ingredient manufacturing business. And we are people that challenge by nature. So we are going to challenge the status quo as individuals and we'll challenge our parents. And so that has also set a culture of it's okay to also say that how we're doing it is not necessarily the right way and that we should be open to leveraging new ideas, new technologies, and that's created the space, hopefully for others to feel that they can also challenge our assumptions as well, because we're also at risk of, gosh, unfortunately, I'm like in the middle of the pack. I like to think of myself as in the younger generation, but I'm not anymore. And there's new people coming through that have even ideas that I haven't been exposed to. So that's been important, just to make sure that we keep that openness, and that's one of our core values, actually.
Right. Bruno, what are your thoughts on this?
It's super interesting to hear what Nicole just shared. And well, it's of course different being at the headquarters of Nestle. As you can imagine that naturally there's a much more senior group of people. So I would say that generation-wise, it's not that balanced. But it's still, there is some contrast, and being a designer, I think I love this concept about contrast and diversity. I think that's where the beauty lies, right? If it's all homogeneous and all of the same, there's no rich debate, there's no contrast, there's no diversity. And I think we try to do that definitely together with the markets. At the center, the teams are very senior, I would say, but there are lots of baby boomers, but lots of millennials as well. And that gap is already enough to create quite a lot of, not tension, but productive debate. And I think we find a very interesting way to balance that, because normally, as established business, established company, we're not looking for, as we call, disruption just for the sake of disruption, right? It has to be very meaningful, and not only for the business but for people. And we always constantly talk about all the new brands and the entrepreneurs and so on. And we, of course, we learn and we observe, and we're paying attention to all of that. But Nestle, as you can imagine, has a commitment with results. We have to be very efficient, right? We cannot really afford too many test and learns that ended failing, and that's what normally happens in the out there. I mean, from 10 new businesses, how many do really come to become a successful big something? So at the same time, it's interesting to see how the younger generations, and I'm not putting myself there anymore as well, but we do work with like Gen Zs even, and they're constantly questioning, but why don't we do that? And why don't we simply change that and break the rules and all? And this sense of risk and what is the balance is not necessarily there. And that's the beauty of the experience. I think sometimes we underestimate experience. And even myself, in my experience with some much more senior leaderships within Nestle, normally, even on the leadership style that you can imagine, that's completely different, how you lead teams and how you give feedback, or how you provoke to get the best out of the teams. I've been into situations that was quite uncomfortable, because this just was how it used to be, how you used to put the pressure on the team and get the best out of them. But that same guy that could be very uncomfortable though in some meetings and presentations, he would normally bring a glimpse of, wisdom that was like, okay, now it's worth going through all the painful process of, being punched, like, oh, you're doing that all wrong, and so on. So I think that balance on having the experience that can open your eyes to things that you haven't seen. And at the end of the day, I think every generation will always challenge the previous one, and will try to break the status quo. I don't think there's nothing new on that. It has been always like that. I think it will always be as well. But this balance and trying to find this middle ground, I think it's a constant dance. I would say it's not a battle, it's more like a dance. And but I love the contrast and I love the diversity, especially in my case here, not only gender, but culturally. We have people from all around the world. It's so rich and it's so complex, but very, very much interesting to live in this environment.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good way of challenging assumptions, which we all have, right? And biases, and having that diversity of thought certainly helps us vet and validate. Thank you both. Great question, Kitty. I want to switch gears really quickly and talk about, and you both mentioned this, when we talk about consumer trust and how we're continuing as organizations, as brands, to build that trust with consumer, and specifically now within the food system. I mean, consumers are obviously becoming more and increasingly more interested in how their food is grown, how it's processed, and then ultimately how it's brought to market. Curious to hear from both of you, because this, I'm sure, again, we talk about legacy, we talk about an up and coming emerging brands, PURIS, and certainly you're accelerating at a rapid pace. But in terms of how you talk about transparency, one in the supply chain, certainly, and how you're continuing to build the trust with your consumer base through transparent practices. So supply chain, but also we think about, building trust isn't just about more science and more research. It's also about shared values and how you articulate those values through marketing, through brand. Can you both touch on the differences or how you are underscoring those practices internally to connect with the consumer and build that trust? Nicole, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, happy to start. This is such an interesting and fundamental question for us, because it's really the undercurrent of why our business exists. And someone asked me earlier this week, what's the most important strategic decision I have made for PURIS? And I actually don't think that the most strategic decision we have made was made 20 years ago by my parents early on in our business. And that was our decision to stay a non-GMO company, non-GMO and organic. And we were that's where we were going to stay. And so what that meant, though, it had a lot of ramifications. This was in the heyday of GMO agriculture, of genetics, germplasms being purchased and owned then by the big chemical companies. And that could have been our path, which at the time we're a very small business, would have been a great liquidity event for us. But we said, no, we were going to go non-GMO. And that informed every future decision. It informed how we built our facilities to maintain traceability to the farm. It informed then how, what our value proposition was for any products that came to be. And so that was that is, and to this day, still core to our structure of our business, this traceability back to the farm, keeping integrity, lot segregation, et cetera. But our brand didn't reflect that. And we didn't have any outward facing material that told anyone that. We just did it kind of in the shadows, and if people got to know us, they would find it out eventually. And they were kind of like, wow, this is amazing. You guys do all this cool stuff. You should tell people. And about 4 years ago, we went through a whole rebranding effort where we went from our company name of World Food Processing, because we wanted to feed the world. That was always the goal of the business when my parents found it. So it was very much world food, and when we process things. So it was very much of a functional name. And we were using the trademark PURIS as part of our ingredient name. So World Food Processing, PURIS, pea protein. And we went through a rebranding effort and ultimately came out with PURIS as our brand name and started to bring to life what we do and tell that to the world. And at the time, I would say a lot of our team didn't appreciate what that would do for us. That it was wow, this is a way that we're spending money. We are a processing business. We make money by gross profit, controlling our costs, and that's where we make money. And this is an investment that doesn't support that. And fast forward 5 years, it's been just a complete pivot in how the world sees us, how we talk to our customers, and how we can showcase our values that have always been there all along, but through material that is easier for people to understand and that they can resonate with. Because like you mentioned, it's really about shared values. And if a customer doesn't know your values, you can't share them, even if you do. And so that's been a very transformative shift for us, is being able to communicate what our values are in a way that, resonates with the market, is easy and fun to understand. But our customers are primarily businesses. So we have to be able to translate our values through them to the end customer. And so that's what's been really fun over the last, I would say, 18 months, is as we have more brands coming into the plant-based food market, it's no longer enough to just say, hey, I'm a plant-based product. 3 years ago, that was enough. Hey, I'm plant-based, so it's good. Now there's a lot of plant-based foods coming on the market. And so now you have to even differentiate between. And so the brands are starting to look back into their supply chains and say, how can I show value to the consumer that's maybe different than this other product that's similar? And that's where the supply chain integrity, transparency starts to come to life and can be really powerful. And something that we have seen is the transparency is something that people want, but it doesn't really enough to move the needle. They're looking for what's the impact of that transparency. Why does having a transparent supply chain matter? Just saying it is no longer good enough, because people then have to look and do a lot of investigating to prove it, and not many people want to do that. So let's consider transparency as table stakes. Now, what else are you giving to me? What comes with that? What's the impact? What's the environmental impact? What's the food safety or quality benefits that I get because of that transparency? And that's the new evolution that we're seeing as far as greenhouse gas footprint. Can you show that your supply chain has a lower impact, reduces scope 3 emissions for the customer? And if you can have both, that's a benefit. If you're doing something from an ecosystem services with your supply chain shed, that is a benefit. But all of these things need to be together. It can't just be one thing. You have to kind of have it all for that value to be enough for the brand to then want to share it with the consumer. Because otherwise it's just not worth it, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of potential exposure to your practices. And if it's not delivering that incremental trust value where the consumer is going to feel real good about buying that, it doesn't move the needle. So we've been working really hard to make that impact easy to understand, so it's easy to translate. And that our brands, a lot of them aren't as big as Nestle. They don't have teams of people who are experts at the science and the marketing and the tech. Like, they need us to really almost give it to them on a very easy to implement platter. And that's the work that we've been doing to try to make it easy for brands, both big and small, to translate the values that my parents made a decision 30 years ago to start showing that so consumers can benefit as well.
Wow, that's impressive. I mean, it's a big shift across the food chain, the value chain, in terms of how transparency, what that means and how it shows up and the benefits. So thank you.
How it shows up is changing really quickly. And it's almost kind of hard to put your finger on where it's going, at least for me. But I think it's definitely a net positive to the consumer, because they're starting to get more tools to really be able to, if they care to know, to figure out where their food's coming from. And for those people who want to know, they've never had more information available than they do today. And we have mostly Apple to thank for that, right? Because this has changed everything.
Right. They're savvy. It's digitally savvy and digital natives that know how to find out the information. So yes. Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for sharing. Bruno, again, we think about marketing and brand and how that articulates your value proposition and building that trust with consumer. Talk about how you've seen brand and marketing work hard for Nestle and your brands and portfolio of brands in that respect.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting because trust is actually fundamental, right? I mean, it is a 360 process. It's not only between the brands and the shoppers or consumers, but with the retailers, with internal trust as well. So definitely trust is something that we need to build in a very strong way. And I was thinking as Nicole was sharing her thoughts about this evolution of the trust, or how much you need to do to gain someone's trust, especially in this now brand to consumer relationship. I think that changed dramatically and keeps changing. And I think on our side, we've been doing an amazing effort to make sure that we are at par at those standards, because trust is somehow linked to quality, right? But what is quality nowadays? It used to be probably just a product that doesn't fail on me, that tastes good, and that was enough, or it was there a good value for money, and then you generate trust in a emotional and functional level, right? I trust this brand in those two levels. I think nowadays it's a much more complex scenario to play. First of all, because there's much more information, as we said. the awareness of what's going on, especially on food, it's tremendous, and the expectations are super high. So for Nestle is also, so with power and size comes responsibility, right? So we know that we need to be at the edge of this movement. We know that we're fully aware that the food system is kind of broken. It cannot be and cannot remain as is. Mm-hmm. And we are putting all our efforts to be part of that change. We know that we are not responsible. Ultimately, we cannot do that alone. It's the whole chain. It's starting from the consumers, of course, because at the end of the day, if there's value on that, and consumers will create trust because of that, mm-hmm. shareholders will put pressure to make sure that we deliver that to consumers. And then the cycle is done. Then it's all good. It's good for everyone. And that's our kind of mantra now. And we know that, and plant-based has been an amazing platform for us. We believe that, and it's interesting because my boss has been telling this for so long now. And at first, when we acquired some brands, people were saying, but why are you spending money on a plant-based brand? And now we see that the vision was right. Mm-hmm. We truly believe that plant-based can be a very interesting or part of the solution for the food system in a way. It's good for you, it's good for the planet, and it can be delicious at the end of the day. I've been vegetarian for the past 9 years now, so I'm kind of biased to say that, but I think that's the key element for me on building trust. And brands, that's the role of the brand, right? Brand is a shortcut for you to say, okay, I go there because I trust these guys. I'm part of that tribe, and there are different levels of trust. Of course, there are some when you are really sharing values with that brand, not only in a very rational relationship, good for money, I get what I want, and that's okay. So that's what great branding does, right? It creates a higher level of trust. Mm-hmm. That ultimately it's great for the business because it creates advocacy and people talk about your brand, right. and so on. So that's how I see the role of trust, but it's not easy, and definitely different from established brands, from the legacy brands that we have, mm-hmm. and then starting something from scratch as well. How do you, and then you have the opportunity to say, let's do everything like as good as possible. But even though, and we saw that during the pandemic, how consumers were strongly shifting back to the more legacy brands, the ones that they trust, and they don't want to, especially on food, because we're talking here about mature markets, developed markets, and so, but food is all about safety as well. I mean, it's a very intuitive relationship. I need that to survive, and I don't want to mess up. So there's also that level of trust that is about food safety, that in many places it's a real issue with counterfeits and things like that. But yeah,
a lot of layers. No, thank you, Bruno.
Yeah.
And again, it's earning trust is really, I think we're all saying the same thing, is key to the food system and brands maintaining its social license. I mean, it's just, that's how you, and there's so many layers to it, but continuing to move along that spectrum is certainly the way to continue to build that trust. So thank you both for sharing.
How do you know that what you're doing is resonating with people? So, other than seeing the sales numbers show up, how do you talk to your audiences? And I would expect that this is going to be one of those situations where we're going to hear two completely different approaches, because, Bruno, you are at Nestle, you've got a whole portfolio of brands, but how do you open that dialogue? What does that research look like? And then what do you do with it?
Well, I think now the digital universe is where you go for that, right? And actually, even especially now after the pandemic, we had to completely shift our research approach to fully virtual, because we couldn't make more of like focus groups or tastings with consumers like face to face. So, and I think we're getting more and more agile in that sense to be constantly listening on the social platforms, what's happening around our brands, but not only the brand itself, not necessarily people talking about the brand, but talking about correlated subjects. And we call that in our methodology strategic content territories. So what are those territories that we want to own as a brand? And we need to be completely in line and in tune with what's generating buzz, what people are talking about. And I mean, at the global level, it's super complex, because you can imagine foods being a completely culture-driven kind of business. It might change completely what's going on in the food universe in Germany versus what's happening in Nigeria. So we know that those very high-level strategic territories will be probably shared across. But what is recipe inspirations? What does that mean in Europe, or what does that mean in South America? Then so the structure is the same, but the content itself changes. But definitely the social tools that we have through search strategy, and of course mapping all the trends and food trends, of course, but even beyond that on more behavior shifts and on societies and so on. So we're constantly trying to do this kind of foresight of what will happen, not only what's new, but what's next, right? I mean, there's something happening in this spectrum of 2 years, 3, but what will happen in 5 to 7, that's much harder to understand and have a clear view.
Katie, our approach is probably quite different, as a primarily, like, most of our sales are happening B2B. And so our customer list is a lot smaller, and then their customers are, the general population. And so we go about it a number of ways. First is looking at what are the brand promises that they're making to their customers that maybe aren't as rock solid as they could be. Like, what are the promises that they want to have full visibility to, but maybe it's only service level today, and how can we help them ramp that up a notch where they can really open up the whole cupboard and say, look, this is what we said and this is what we do. Like, we've said this, but here's what we're doing behind the scenes to make this a reality, and trying to bring targeted solutions to those brands. And then we are very nimble, and so we do a lot of, like, let us show you what it could look like. What do you think? Like, would this meet your need? And so we've done that over the last 12 months with one of our new, I would say, impact traceability kind of platforms. And we had a lot of failures along the way where we'd be like, this is the thing that's going to change it. And we'd show people and then just be flat. No one really cared. And you're like, okay, that didn't work. So, kind of like test, iterate, using some just like more digital tools. And when we kind of came up with one solution where everyone started really like sitting up in their chairs and being like, hey, are you guys doing this now? Is this available? That's when we knew, hey, this is something that is actually starting to like get to the hearts and minds of what they actually want, but haven't been able to maybe say precisely. And that ability, I would say, to kind of test the waters and show a little bit more of our cards than maybe bigger brands would at this early stage. I think it helps us be able to address the customer need better, because we can really figure out exactly what it is before we dive all the way into the development. And we have a huge advantage for us that we have a vertically integrated system. So we have a ton of data at our kind of disposal. And so we can kind of pick and choose what really is needed. And then once we decide, move really quickly. So it's been an interesting journey, because we've showed more in the past 18 months about what's to come than we ever have in the past. But it's allowed us to get really a lot deeper relationships with our customers and start to understand their customers better, so that we can then predict more of what they need, and the next time around get there a lot faster. So that's been, I would say, how we know we've hit it is through like validation directly from them.
That's great.
Yeah. But it's interesting, if I may, this sense of testing the water even for a big brand like Nestle, we tried that also. And there are some facilities, like we have in each and every office around the world, we have our Nestle stores, right, where we sell our own products to our employees. And we've been testing quite a lot of ideas in this very prototype way to put those products there, kind of not fully developed on both sides. Even product side, maybe we still don't know how to scale up, or branding wise, it's not also fully defined. But that's also a very interesting sense check if there is potential or not, in a more tangible way, because definitely then people are like literally trying the product, they're eating or they're drinking. Still, of course, in a kind of controlled environment, and that's not the same as a final kind of retail. But that gives some interesting indications in this kind of end of the funnel process of innovation. Of course, there's plenty of consumer assessment in between and before that, but that's where the rubber hits the road, I guess, right? It's the reality check. I mean, if it's in the shelf and someone grabs your product, then there's something, and if that's frequent enough to make a business around it, and then we scale up, then we fully develop. But yeah, that's an interesting approach.
Yeah, it's the behavior that becomes the most defining, the real answer from people. We can engage people in conversation and they'll tell us one thing, but watching their behaviors is really telling the full story of
exactly
what they're wanting.
Yeah, and I've been very provocative with my consumer insights colleagues. I mean, coming from design, you've all seen design researches where you simulate a shelf and then the shopper goes there and selects something. And yeah, that can give you an indication, but I'm pretty sure when someone with a shopping list, in my case, if my wife gives me a shopping list and I have 30 minutes to go to the grocery, do all of that, that's a completely different mindset, a different scenario. So my behavior in front of the shelf will be very different than simply reacting to a virtual shelf in a controlled environment. So that's why the closer you get to the reality, the more you will learn. But at the same time, on the contrary, we also have built so much knowledge and understanding about the category, about the consumer behaviors. There are just some things that are like no-brainers. We know what we should do. We should simply go and do. And then you learn how it's going on, and we at Nestle were very good at testing and learning and running researches and collecting even more data and so on. But we're trying to be more intuitive in a way, because that's also the big difference. That's where the agility comes from, right? And you go when someone decides to start a business and found my own granola brand, I would not do any research. I mean, I just love granola. I will hire something to do the design. Not in my case, because I could do my own design, but that's it. There is a gut feeling, of course, that if you want to do that, if it makes sense for you, first of all, probably there will be more like you out there that will share that will to buy that category, that product, that solution. So it's an interesting balance between methodologies or instinct and gut feelings, educated guesses, things like that.
Exactly, right. Different types of research applied in the aisle, in a virtual environment. Ethnography is now, just to give more robust insights. How are we further connecting? So it's an interesting exercise in understanding who our customers are today. I want to take a quick minute. We've touched on plant-based, and I know we've had previous conversations about this acceleration in the plant-based movement across the food system. Clearly, Nicole, very close to your heart. Your business was built on this effort, but I'd love to hear from both of you what you think is driving this revolution, and how are emerging brands and legacy of brands alike jumping in. This isn't a trend. This isn't going away. This is only accelerating. So can you both share some insights around this movement?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to what Bruno has to say here. Looking at it from like more of a global and, giant brand perspective. This has been my life. I've been told that we are a plant-based food company, even when we were just developing genetics for soybeans. And so it made no sense at that point in time, but that was always the vision for our company. And for most of my life, people didn't know what that meant. Like, what does plant-based foods mean? That's French fries. And I think what's changed is that in the past, 10, really 5 years, plant-based foods have the product quality, the experience has just fundamentally shifted from what it was in the 90s and 2000s, really. The products today don't feel like a compromise. And that ability to have great tasting products that you just want to eat, you feel good about eating, has changed the whole perception of what it is to be plant-based. So all of the good parts of it, environmental footprint, the nutrition, that was all there before too. But if it doesn't taste good, people don't want to eat it. Like, at the end of the day, it's got to taste great. And what's changed is now the products taste great, and there's more innovation coming every single day that make them better and better, and more use cases where if you want ice cream, you can have a non-dairy plant-based ice cream that's still indulgent. If you want a burger, you can have one. I mean, there's so many of your meal occasions now that you can have basically the same meal, but you're swapping in a plant-based option, and the experience is still great. And that just completely changes the game for a consumer who wants to eat healthier and lower their environmental footprint, but they still want their food to taste good, because food is emotional. And if they can't have that same experience, they're just not going to be a repeat customer. So in my perspective, that has been like the biggest change. And there was a few brands who really like spearheaded it in I would say, like the hearts and minds of individuals. And now as people experiment with the products and find like, hey, they're actually pretty good, then all of those other benefits come to play. And it's like, oh, I can really feel good about this choice for myself, for my family, and it's not a compromise. So it's really exciting for us, just having this market grow the way that it is. And it's got a long runway ahead of it. I'm very excited for that. And I'm really curious Bruno's thoughts on this, so I'm going to give him some time.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'm super passionate about the topic. I truly believe in the future of plant-based. And even now, I actually had a meeting this morning about even the terminology, calling it plant-based. And how, for instance, I've seen popping up the term plant forward, which for me already sounds something a bit more exciting, more dynamic. And even what does that stand is also something perhaps even more universal. But anyway, I think there are different drivers for that trend, or why is this category, this movement growing so fast. I think there was at first a very genuine intention of making better food choices for the planet. And I relate that with myself. Why I started becoming vegetarian was animal welfare, sustainability issues, all of that. And at the time, there was compromises especially on taste, texture. Even like socially, it was hard to go with my friends somewhere because there wouldn't be many options to me to eat. So I think that's how it started, right? But what really, I think whenever the technology enabled that compromise to be completely killed, that's where the boom started. Because the product became amazing. So taste will always be first in any food category. Taste will always be first. Taste always. And then the products became really good. And then I think the second key driver was the business opportunity, because the business is huge, basically like that. Why Nestle acquired Sweet Earth or Garden Gourmet 10 years ago, or a bit less, but because the business opportunity was huge. So I think it's this combination that started with a very genuine, almost naive. I mean, if you talk with Kelly Sweet, the founder of Sweet Earth, that was her intention. She was really looking for delicious plant-based food because she was vegetarian and she couldn't find easily. She wanted to do that and make that accessible for more and more people. But then I think it extrapolated that initial purpose or belief I think that belief is still there, but to really get mainstream and spread like it's spreading now, that second level of this sense of no compromise, the sense of I don't need to become a full vegan right away. I can start that flexitarian journey, and maybe still I'm gonna eat here and there some meat. I think that the whole behavior of the people also changed to alongside the category, the technology, and so on. But I definitely see, and I think it was what's his name, the guy who founded Virgin Records, Virgin everything. He once said probably in the future we will be like you will look back and say, oh, you remember those times where we used to eat real meat, where we used to kill animals to eat meat. I honestly believe that in the future, I'm talking about, let's say, like, 30, 50 years, this probably will become a luxury item to eat real animals, because we're getting into a point where it will be very hard to distinguish between one another. And it's simply, as proven, I think, not sustainable.
Right.
Bruno, did you say flexitarian?
Yeah.
I am not familiar with that.
Well, maybe this is a business terminology. What we know is that that's the biggest chunk of consumers, or out there, people that are proactively reducing the amount of meat they eat every week. So we know that vegetarians normally are around like 5 to 10% of the population, depending on the maturity of the market. But flexitarians can be up to 30, 40% of that same geography. And that's where the biggest opportunity lies on, right? If you are approachable enough, you are convincing enough to make them try your products, if your product delivers, and then that frequency might get higher and higher. I think that's the kind of the plan of all the brands out there. It's grabbing those that are considering, they're aware of the impact of that choice, and they want to feel good about that as well. I mean, I've been hearing about all this cowspiracy, cispiracy. Oh my God, I should do something about it, right? And then starting slowly by slowly, that's what those are the flexitarians in our definition. I don't know if you share the vision, Nicole, but that's how we see it.
Definitely. And started with the like 1 meal a day or 1 meal a week, swap out meat, or Meatless Monday, all these different ways to get people to like kind of just reduce. Not saying you have to full sale switch, but just take an active approach to that. And what we've always said for PURIS is the risk is that if you have a Meatless Monday consumer and they buy a product that doesn't taste good, they might not do Meatless Monday again, right? And they'll go right back to their old ways. And so that's why taste is so important. But if you have that Meatless Monday and it's like, hey, this feels like every other Monday and I don't feel like I missed anything, you're more likely to start embedding those foods just as part of your normal grocery list and just having them around and cooking them. So it's an entry point for people to feel a little less. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's just one like little choice that they can make. And if it goes well, great. And if it doesn't, not a big commitment.
Yeah. That's a smart way to look at it. It can be intimidating for those that think it's this movement that's happening in the background and not really an understanding of all the benefits, certainly. But again, yes, goes back to taste and how will I purchase the product again? What was my experience like? And how we are articulating what those benefits are through brand, through messaging. It's an education. I mean, we're certainly finding as we're connecting with in the CPG space, plant-based brands that are trying to connect with consumers and form that understanding of. So, Bruno, do you have to
and this is I love this part, which is basically the role of design, right? It's making things sexy, because it used to be like eco boring or green boring, like vegetarian talk and all of that, and that's the power of brands, right? Making things exciting. We clearly see that if you compare the design, the visual codes that Linda McCartney's in the UK, when they started like 20 years ago with plant-based, and how now brands, and even on the verbal, on the tone of voice of the brands, how they call themselves, it's completely different. It's different set of visual codes there and verbal codes being applied, basically to grab attention, and we've done that mapping of visual codes. It started as almost like food as medicine. It's good for you, and in an almost pharmaceutical way, even in the codes that you use. And now it's kind of in this debate. I mean, it's as good as meat. And there are brands that are already in the emerging side of codes that are jumping into that discussion, jumping over that discussion if it's good or as good or as meat or not, and actually going into a lifestyle choice. I do it because I like it. That resonates with my values and so on. But it's interesting to see how the whole dynamic of the category evolved as well.
Yes, there's a confidence now, I think, with brands that say it's no longer it's as good as, you should try it. It's leaping forward. No, it's fascinating. Thank you both. Kitty, I know we're running short, getting to the top of the hour here, but there's so much more I know we'd love to talk about. But Kitty, you have another thought to share?
So maybe, and this is a great closing to the conversation, what do you see 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And I think we all in general answer this question a little bit differently when we realize that these things can hit us from out of the blue. Nobody really expected 2020 to be what it was. So we know that things like that can happen, but what are you planning for? And what do you see in the industry for your businesses?
Well, for PURIS, we're definitely planning for the plant-based industry to continue to grow in the next, just in the US alone, it's expected to grow from about 7 billion to 85 in the next 9 years in billion. So it's like just rapid growth. And that, as a supply chain partner in that growth, scale is so important. And so investment ahead of the curve in infrastructure, partnerships with farmers, that processing to really enable the on-shelf growth to happen. And I think that's kind of some of the behind the scenes stuff that isn't as visible, but it's so important that brands like PURIS, and we have investment from Cargill on the ingredient side to really put the scaled infrastructure, which can start talking about affordability and accessibility too. And when those things are also there, when you have taste and affordability and accessibility, all of a sudden the market and the opportunities for other people to try and enter also expand. And so we're looking to see if those kind of things start being commonplace, where plant-based food isn't premium, it's competitive pricing to animal products, and that market continue to grow, and continuing to see new innovations, so different types of products and experiences there, as well as how do we start making the system a little bit more efficient. So instead of thinking about all the different blocks and how do you piece them together, how do you architect the food system with that in mind? So as we build and scale the planet to feed, another 3 billion people, we do that in a smart and kind of resource efficient way. So I'm really excited for it. I'm happy that hopefully we'll be around in 2050 to see what the world has accomplished. And I feel fortunate to be kind of in the moment we're in now, where there seems to be this kind of collective opinion that we got to do something. And so I do think that we're like poised for change, which is exciting.
That's great.
Yeah. And Bruno, you just keep creating brands and acquiring brands. So
I think definitely will be a lot of energy and movement in that category. We share the vision. I mean, it's definitely high hopes for the category, high growth. I think the key things will be, I will add to what Nicole said, I think the nutritional side of this will be also key in the future, because if you just simply compare the ingredient list of different brands, you see that there is a quite difference. So I think the more natural this will become also will be key to the future, because that's also a key concern for consumers, right? But how they manage to do this that looks like meat and even bleeds, and So that sense of transparency and educating consumers on that, I think it's also key. And I think technology will keep helping us to push innovation. I mean, to different sorts of protein and getting better and better, and the texture. I think getting different sources of protein or of plant protein will be also critical. I don't think we should shift from one single-minded source kind of mindset that led us to where we are now. I think this the biodiversity on the food system is critical, and that also talks to the plant-based universe. As a vegetarian, I also see clearly two very distinct worlds. One is this kind of meat analogs that are trying to mimic the kind of the emotional benefit that I have, because I remember my Brazilian barbecues when I used to eat meat, and that's great to have a nice burger that emulates that. But at the same time, I also do appreciate the vegetables on its own. So I don't think plant-based is only about emulating meat. I think there is also this role of educating about the diversity of the different ingredients that you might get, nutrition and taste. So I think that's another frontier for the category, but definitely super excited to see what's going to happen in the next years, and definitely the role of brands, very, very much in line with what we said before, to first of all seduce or conquer and engage with consumers, that creating trust first, as we said, right? And maybe in the future we'll need more, because one brand will stand for something, the other brand will stand for something else. So I think the nuances of this category will also get more complex and complex, as any industry that evolves. Cars used to be just cars, then you have now, and then you had a bit more sportive cars, or more family cars, or economy car, or safe cars. Now we have electric cars. I think that will be the same. There will be, through brands, you will get different emotional benefits and key attributes related to the brands. So it will be fun, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
It's so fun talking to people that are doing such important work. So thank you both for doing the work that you're doing to feed the world. It's wonderful.